He came to Kenya to preach peace, but he died a martyr for justice. On August 24, 2000, the body of Father John Anthony Kaiser, a bold American priest and human rights defender, was found by the roadside in Kenya with a gunshot wound to the head. A man of deep conviction, he had spent over 3 decades fighting for the oppressed, exposing powerful political forces, and speaking out against ethnic violence. His death was officially ruled a suicide, but to many, it was cold-blooded murder. This is the story of Father Kaiser, the priest who dared to speak truth to power and paid the ultimate price. Dark Echoes Survival. In the heart of rural Kenya, far from the spotlight of power and politics, walked a tall, quiet American priest with fierce eyes and even fiercer sense of justice. His name was Father John Anthony Kaiser. Born in the small town of Parham, Minnesota in 1932, Kaiser grew up surrounded by the values of humanity, service, and discipline. He served in the U.S. Army, and after returning home, he followed his spiritual calling. He was ordained as the Catholic priest in 1964, joining the Mill Hill Missionaries, a congregation dedicated to international missions. His path soon led him to Kenya, a place that would become his home, his mission field, and ultimately the place of his death. When Father Kaiser arrived in Kenya in the mid-1960s, the country was still young, barely a few years into independence from British colonial rule. Tribal tensions, political growing pains, and a deeply unequal society created a breeding ground for conflict. But Kaiser didn't come to Kenya to live a comfortable life. He chose to serve in the most remote, marginalized areas, places like Lolgorian, Kisii, and later the Rift Valley region, where poverty was entrenched and tribal clashes were escalating. Unlike many foreign missionaries who stayed in the city parishes or elite schools, Father Kaiser embedded himself among the ordinary people, subsistence farmers, displaced families, and traumatized survivors of political violence. He learned the local languages, he listened to their pain, and most importantly, he stood with them. By the early 1990s, Kenya was descending into chaos. Ethnic violence was erupting across the Rift Valley. Entire villages were being burned to the ground. Thousands were being driven from their homes, especially during election periods. The violence, many believed, wasn't spontaneous. It was orchestrated and political. And Father Kaiser saw it clearly. He began documenting what others were too afraid to speak about: land grabbing, forced eviction, and state-sponsored ethnic cleansing. He didn't just bear witness, he acted. When Kikuyu families were expelled from their homes in Maasai-dominated areas, he gave them refuge on church grounds. He filed official complaints with local authorities. He took testimonies from victims, and then he did the unthinkable. He named names. Father Kaiser directly accused top-ranking government officials of fueling the violence. He criticized Nicholas Biwott, then Minister of Energy and one of President Daniel Arap Moi's closest allies. He called out the systematic corruption and land theft by those in power. He supported survivors of sexual abuse and rape, even when the accused were politically protected. He became a relentless advocate for justice, and that made him a threat. Government agents began monitoring him. He received anonymous threats. At one point, he was temporarily deported, though public outcry, especially from the Catholic Church and international human rights organization, forced the Kenyan government to allow him back. Still, Father Kaiser didn't back down. In 1998, he appeared before the Akiwumi Commission, a formal inquiry into the causes of tribal clashes. He provided evidence linking government officials to the violence. He planned to testify at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, and in the final months, he continued collecting evidence, preparing a damning report on political complicity in ethnic cleansing. In the eyes of the powerful, he was no longer just a missionary, he was a whistleblower, a resistor, a witness too dangerous to be allowed to speak. But to the people, especially those who had lost everything, he was something else entirely. He was a symbol of hope, a man who did what no one else dared to do, a white priest who didn't shield himself behind the church's prestige, but instead walked with the wounded, spoke for the silenced, and demanded justice in a country where justice was for sale. Father Kaiser lived simply. He drove an old pickup truck, wore worn-out clothes, and refused luxury. His greatest wealth was his integrity. He was not afraid to challenge injustice, even if it meant standing alone, and that courage would cost him everything. By the year 2000, Father Anthony Kaiser had become a thorn in the side of the Kenyan political elite. He was no longer just a foreign priest stationed in rural missions. He was a relentless voice echoing through courtrooms, commissions, and refugee camps. His unwavering pursuit of truth had put him on a collision course with Kenya's most powerful figures. At the heart of it all was his work with internally displaced people and his damning testimony at the Akiwumi Commission, a government-established inquiry into the ethnic clashes that had plagued Kenya since the early 1990s. In 1993, Father Kaiser appeared before the commission and gave detailed account of how politicians, some sitting in cabinets, were orchestrating violence and land grabs for political gain. He submitted names, dates, and evidence, a bold and dangerous move. But he didn't stop there. In 2000, he was compiling even more testimony, this time to be presented before the International Criminal Courts, The Hague. He was expected to speak about land injustices and politically instigated ethnic violence. Sources close to him say he was preparing a final report that directly linked government officials, including Nicholas Biwott. Father Kaiser was a witness the regime could not afford to let speak. In the weeks leading up to his death, those close to him noticed changes. He seemed restless, cautious. Reports indicate he was increasingly paranoid about surveillance and threats. His phone had odd clicks. His movements were followed. At times, he spoke of a looming danger but stayed silent on specifics. Still, he refused to leave Kenya. He had been given the option to return to the US or relocate to a safer diocese, but he declined. His mission was not finished. Then came August 2000. On the evening of August 23rd, Father Kaiser left his post at Lolgorian and drove towards Naivasha. He reportedly told a few confidants he was delivering documents likely tied to the upcoming international testimony. At some point that night, he vanished. The following morning, August 24th, his body was found slammed under an acacia tree at Morendat, just off Nakuru-Naivasha highway. A shotgun, his own, lay beside him. There was a single fatal gunshot wound to the back of his head. The scene was hastily marked off by police. The official narrative? Suicide. Authorities claimed he had taken his own life due to mental strain. The FBI, brought in by the US Embassy, controversially supported this claim and in their joint investigation with Kenya's authority. But the public and those who truly knew Father Kaiser were not convinced because the fact didn't add up. Kenyan pathologists pointed out inconsistencies. For instance, the gunshot wound was at the angle and distance that made suicide extremely unlikely. There was no gunpowder residue on his hands. The shotgun would have been awkward, if not impossible, to use on oneself in that manner. His pickup truck, parked nearby, was strangely clean and untouched. Most disturbing was the timing. Father Kaiser was just weeks away from testifying before an international court. He had been actively collecting sensitive information. He had been under surveillance and had received threats, and yet, within 24 hours of leaving to deliver key documents, he was dead. To many, this wasn't suicide but an execution. The Catholic Church, especially in Kenya, was outraged. Archbishop Ndingi Mwana publicly rejected the suicide claim. Human rights groups including Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch demanded an independent inquest. For them, Father Kaiser had been silenced, and still, despite the outcry, this case was nearly buried. It took 7 years before justice would even partially start. In 2007, a Kenyan government inquest finally rejected the suicide theory, concluding that Father Kaiser did not commit suicide but was murdered by unknown persons. The judge cited political motivation, his upcoming testimony, and the suspicious forensic evidence as key factors. But by then, the trail had gone cold. No one was ever arrested. No names were formally charged. The powerful remained untouched. In the end, Father Kaiser's final days were marked by courage in the face of immense danger. He didn't run. He didn't hide. He chose to finish what he started, even if it meant dying for it. And in doing so, he became more than a priest. He became a martyr, a symbol, and a reminder of what it means to stand for truth no matter the cost. His death sent shockwaves not only through Kenya but around the world. The brutal, mysterious circumstances under which he died and the speed with which authorities tried to bury the truth made one thing crystal clear: his murder wasn't just a tragedy, it was a warning. In the days following his death, outrage erupted. In Kenya, thousands of people gathered at memorial service, many openly weeping, others holding signs that read, "Justice for Father Kaiser." To the communities he served, refugees, the landless, ethnic minorities, his death felt personal. This was the man who sheltered them, fed them, stood beside them when no one else would. The Catholic Church stood firmly against the official suicide narrative. Bishops, clergy, and international Catholic organizations decried the investigation as a cover-up. His funeral mass was filled with the defiance. One priest remarked, "You can kill the body, but you cannot silence the truth." And yet, for a long time, it seemed the truth would stay buried. The Kenyan government showed little interest in pursuing the case further. The joint FBI-Kenya police conclusion that Kaiser had committed suicide was met with global skepticism, particularly given the glaring contradiction in forensic evidences. Many human rights defenders pointed out that this wasn't just a case of one man's death. It was a reflection of a broader system of impunity and corruption, but the people didn't forget. Year after year, activists and members of clergy held vigils in Father Kaiser's memory. His story became a rallying cry for justice reform in Kenya. Human rights organizations used his case as a symbol of the danger faced by whistleblowers, activists, and outspoken clergy who dared to confront political powers. In 2007, after tireless pressure from the public and civil society groups, the Kenyan government finally held an official inquest into Father Kaiser's death. The inquest concluded decisively that Father Kaiser was murdered. The magistrate stated that there was overwhelming evidence to suggest that he did not kill himself, but rather was executed by unknown individuals, likely for political reasons. Still, justice remains out of reach. The inquest named no suspects, no arrests were made, no politician were ever interrogated. For the public, it was a bittersweet victory. Confirmation that the truth had been suppressed, but no accountability for those responsible. Despite the lack of legal justice, Father Kaiser's legacy only grew stronger. In Kenya, schools, roads, and churches have been named in his honor. His image, towering with kind but determined eyes, appeared on murals and posters during social justice campaign. His writings, sermons and letters were studied by theologians and activists alike, a blueprint for what it means to live our faith in action. To the Catholic Church in East Africa, he is more than a martyr. He is a saint in everything but official title. A priest who didn't just preach love and justice but embodied them, even when it put him in danger. To human rights defenders, his life is a reminder of the power and the cost of truth-telling. His work with displaced persons and victims of state violence laid the groundwork for later efforts to expose the dark underbelly of political corruption in Kenya. Internationally, his story is told in seminars, documentaries, and journals that focus on clergy activism, political suppression, and the role of faith in the fight of human dignity. In 2014, discussions emerged around the potential beatification of Father Kaiser, an early step in the Catholic process towards sainthood. While no official process has been confirmed, the mere conversation reflects the profound spiritual and social impact of his life. Perhaps most importantly, Father Kaiser's legacy lives on the countless people he inspired: young priests who choose to serve the conflict zones, activists who refuse to stay silent, ordinary Kenyans who now understand that one voice, when unwavering, can shake the walls of power. He once said, "If I die today, I die in a good cause," and he did. They tried to silence him, but in death, Father Anthony Kaiser speaks louder than ever. His voice echoes in the fight for justice across Kenya, across the world, and across time.